the chosen one. Be brave, Professor. Be brave like my mother.
How do you feel?
Excellent. Really excellent.
Hey everyone, welcome to Hogwarts, a podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Hogwarts, a podcast. We are covering Chapter 10, The House of Gaunt. Mollie is back with us.
Hello! My favorite chapter. I love this chapter for so many weird reasons.
All right, can't wait to get into it. This is basically centered around one major event. This is the Albus lesson. We get a little bit of Dumbledore teaching Harry, and we basically dive into Bob Ogden's memory. And that's basically the bulk of this chapter, so we'll get into that. I will say that because this is a teacher, Albus is a teacher at heart, and this is a lesson that he's teaching, and I would call this a bombastic first lesson where you're diving into a person's memory and learning about Voldemort.
Yeah.
So I'm counting this as a bombastic first lesson. We get some pre-lesson stuff. Harry's got to actually make his way there. So we learn that there's been a gap of time of the week. Harry's now at that Saturday that he was supposed to be having detention, but got out of it. Harry has continued his success at potions, which has disgruntled both Ron and Hermione, even though Harry, to his best efforts, has tried to help them out. Hermione has flat rejected it. Ron has tried to accept the help, but can't really decipher the instructions as well as Harry. And Harry can't exactly just be reading the instructions out loud. That's weird. So it's an attempt, but a failed one. Now, there is an interesting moment where Harry's on his way to Albus's office, and he runs into Trelawney, muttering to herself in the hallway. And she goes, 2 of spades, conflict. 7 of spades, ill omen. 10 of spades, violence. Knave of spades, dark young man who dislikes questioner. And then she goes, well, that can't be right. And Harry just kind of sloughs it off as well, that's just Trelawney being Trelawney. She doesn't put this in here if it doesn't mean something, right?
Yeah.
Because why?
Right.
You just wouldn't have this in here. Mm-hmm. So this is an odd thing for Harry to just stumble upon. Anyway, we get to Albus's office, and I love we get more Albus quotes, which I just love. You could have a full book of just Albus quotes. And he goes, we're leaving the firm foundation of fact, journeying to murky marshes of memory and thickets of guesswork. Mm-hmm. We also learned that Albus is a big fan of alliteration. But yes, I love it.
And just like the Humphrey Bletcher who believed the time was ripe for a cheese cauldron. What?
Albus is some people make mistakes. Humphrey Belcher thought a cheese cauldron was a good thing. And I'm sorry, is it not a good thing?
Right?
That is that I would buy so many cheese cauldrons.
Yeah.
That's amazing. You could put can you imagine if you melted the middle, made a little fondue, you could stick some bread in that. You could there's so many uses for cheese cauldrons.
Many.
I think the genius of Humphrey Belcher was missed.
I would agree, and this is why this chapter is my favorite, because they're really missing the mark on cheese cauldrons.
I know. You could just take a piece, put it on a cracker, have some. I mean, there's so many things you can do with these cheese cauldrons. Mollie and I, big fans of cheese,
yes,
clearly.
Yeah.
So Dumbledore does admit that he too can make mistakes. He is a man, albeit a very clever man. Thus, when he does make mistakes, they tend to be pretty big mistakes. Me personally, I think we've already seen a couple in this series. You could argue have been big mistakes. So there is that. The lesson that will be had is diving into the memory. And as he's getting the pensieve ready, Harry notes that, hey, your hand, still not great. What about it? And Dumbledore's like, it's a story for another time. And then they dive into Bob Ogden's memory. Bob Ogden. Random. Just so random.
Real random.
Who called Albus's first lesson to Harry being a Bob Ogden memory? I sure didn't. but when I first read this, I was like, oh, Bob Ogden. Who's he? Should I know him?
Mm-hmm.
No, you shouldn't know him. He is a former Department of Magical Law Enforcement employee, specifically head of the Magical Law Enforcement Squad, who is now deceased. We find him near Little Hangleton, between the towns of, I think it's Big Hangleton and Little Hangleton. But he's heading in the direction of Little Hangleton. He stops at a derelict house with a dead snake nailed to the door, which is a little ominous. Thus, he pulls out his wand.
Not weird at all.
Not weird, not off-putting. And he gets introduced, frighteningly, to Morphin.
Mm-hmm.
And what we learn about Morphin, he's Parseltongue, which Harry eventually picks up on. He doesn't pick up on it initially until Dumbledore's like, I bet you know what he's saying, Harry. And it's like, oh, he's speaking Parseltongue.
Right.
And then once he notes that, now he can pick up all of the hissing in the background. So there's a little bit of that. Morphin is relatively tall, hair matted with dirt, so much so that you can't even tell what actual color the hair is. Seems to be a problem. Several teeth missing. Eyes are generally small and tend to be staring in different directions. He has a wand in one hand and a knife in the other.
Yeah. That is quite a description of someone.
It's a very pointed description.
Yeah.
Like, is this one of the more detailed descriptions that she's gone into? Like, she really, do we know, the real look of McGonagall's eyes?
Right?
Or anything like that? Is this, one of the...
No.
I still feel like this is a real pointed description.
Yes.
We also get Mr. Gaunt, whose first name we learn is Marvolo, which we'll double back on that later. He's shorter, broad shoulders, very long arms, overlong arms, and he has brown eyes, scrubby hair, and a wrinkled face. Wonderful, flattering descriptions of Mr. Gaunt.
These are very attractive people.
We get a very interesting portrait of Mr. Gaunt, because Morphin doesn't really say much. He's aggressive. He's very much in an attacking manner all of the time. And he doesn't say much until they get into the house later. But Mr. Gaunt does more of the talking. And he puts Ogden on notice early with oh, are you a muggle lover? Are you a half-blood? Are you a muggle-born? Are you a pureblood? He sets this, lineage thing right up front. Who am I talking to?
Mm-hmm.
And to Ogden's credit, he's like, I don't think that makes much of a difference one way or the other. Mm-hmm. I'm here on ministry business, It's an interesting setup that sets the stage for what's about to happen. And before we go further in and actually get to the house, what are your thoughts on Mr. Gaunt and Morphin?
So I think when I drop myself into this chapter, as if I were Harry in the pensive, clearly there is something very not right about Morphin. He's got some issues, whether that's inbreeding, we don't know.
We get hints to that later.
Yes. Mr. Gaunt, very gruff, but supportive of his son and the way that his son is thinking and reacting to the situation. Just him saying, this is private property, can't just walk in here and expect my son not to defend himself. Okay, aggressive. That sets the tone. So those are definitely my first impressions of cleanliness is not high on their list either.
They're wizards. You don't need a water supply to clean.
Yeah.
You just wave a wand and you can be clean.
Yeah.
I don't get it.
Yeah.
But
I think they're very comfortable in the way that they're living.
They appear to be. Bob Ogden does talk his way into the Gaunt household because he does throw ministry related. It's hey, your son has committed a crime. We need to figure this out. And they go into the house, and Morphin is seen sitting in a chair playing with a snake and hissing at it. And Harry picks up the hissing as a song that he is singing to the snake. And that song is Hissy, hissy, little snaky. Slither on the floor. You be good to Morphin, or he'll nail you to the door.
Yep.
That's comforting.
Oh, yes.
Not psychotic
No.
or sociopathic in any way, shape, or form.
Absolutely not. Very normal.
We do notice that there is another person in the room who has not made her presence really known yet. I don't know how you want to pronounce it, whether it's Merope or Merope or however you want to pronounce it.
Yeah.
Obviously, the daughter of Mr. Gaunt, Marvolo. She's described as a plain, pale face. Hair is lank and dull. Eyes also staring in opposite directions. Clean, but looks defeated. Just looks like a shell of a human being. And who's trying clearly to blend into the wall as much as possible and not be noticed, not be referred to, not be talked to, not be anything. Which is just a sad existence to live.
That's really sad.
We find out that the crime Morphin has committed was performing magic in front of a muggle, hence the visit by Mr. Ogden. We get interactions between, I'll go with Merope. Merope and Mr. Gaunt Mr. Gaunt seems to be, I'll put this mildly, verbally and emotionally abusive.
Yeah.
At the very least.
Say so.
To Merope. And she's trying to make something on the stovetop. She drops the pan, and he goes like, "Oh, why are you scrounging around on the floor like a muggle? Like, what are you doing? You have a wand, use it." She tries. It flies across the room, breaks in two. Ogden ends up repairing it, and he calls Merope. Mr. Gaunt calls Merope a squib. And if you remember what a squib is, it's a non-magically imbued person born to a wizarding family. So it's literally the opposite of a muggle born. Muggle family, but wizarding kid. So it's literally the inverse. So he calls her a squib. Gaunt flashes a ring with the Peveril coat of arms on it at Ogden and shows also a heavy locket around Merope's neck that he claims to be Salazar Slytherins. And he also claims to be the last living descendants of one Salazar Slytherin. Ogden does not seem terribly impressed by this and was like, that's all fine and good, except your son attacked a muggle. That is illegal.
He's very down to business.
He is. Well, Mr. Gaunt's trying to distract and like disorient Ogden with all this stuff.
Right.
And present a position of power because of his lineage or claimed lineage. And Ogden is like, that's all fine and good, but it's illegal.
Right.
And then Mr. Gaunt's like, oh, so it's illegal to attack a muggle now? And Ogden's like, yes, yes, it is. You can't do that. Morphin ends up adding his 2 cents in. This is where he's, I guess, the most vocal, if you can call it really vocal. Is he claims that Merope is fawning over this muggle that he attacked and waits for him outside every time he passes by the house, looks at him through the window, all this kind of stuff. And then Gaunt goes to attack Merope and actually like throttles her, like grabs her by the throat, like aggressive, very aggressive, and again, abusive. To which Ogden intervenes and makes him release his daughter. And by using a spell on Mr. Gaunt, Morphin reacts and starts just firing off jinx after hex, just wildly. And Ogden ends up sprinting out of the house, runs into said muggle and what seems to be his fiancée on a horse-drawn carriage. They laugh at him because Bob Ogden, by the way, is dressed in this ridiculous outfit.
Yeah.
I mean, it's absurd.
Yeah, it's like a swimming costume, they said.
Yeah.
It's real weird.
It's weird. So, yeah, there's that. I'm sorry. I'm just side tangent here. There are muggles everywhere.
Yeah.
How do you not know what a muggle... Like, this cannot be that difficult.
Yeah, to pick up on what...
Like, a pair of jeans and a t-shirt is all you need.
Right.
Like...
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Right.
Like, you can't figure this out? This seems Dumbledore's a smart man. Like, there are smart individuals here
Right.
in the wizarding world, and you can't figure out a jeans and a t-shirt look? Like, this blows my mind.
Well, I mean, to be fair, Jude Law's Dumbledore, 3-piece suit, chef's kiss, you know.
Okay, but, like, literally not that far after, we get, like, a look at Dumbledore like, what are you wearing right now?
I know. Not saying that I enjoy those movies, but Jude Law, 3-piece tweed suit, all about it.
So, what
and
are...
now I'm going to make a love potion. You're welcome, Dan.
If you missed our conversations on love potions, go back to our last chapter, chapter 9, where Mollie and I have a whole tangent on love potions. What are your thoughts on this interaction here in the house?
I mean, people are probably like, really? This is her favorite chapter of this book?
Yeah, that's fair.
Because it's extremely dark. Like, you see someone getting abused and
aggressively abused. Yeah,
you know, like, it's really sad. But there's reasons why I like it. Yeah, I mean, I feel for I in my head I read it as Merope.
Okay.
You know, I just want to like go and save her and get her out of there. I think that Bob Ogden, he's good at his job because he's very like, I'm not gonna get sidetracked by this stuff. Like, this is what your son has done. You know, these are the consequences.
I have a question about Bob Ogden, though, because he's the head of a magical law enforcement squad. And while he seems to be a more than competent wizard, he should be, I feel like, able to handle at least two, because Merope is not exactly, like, ready for confrontation in any way. She seems very much the antithesis of confrontation.
Right, she's trying to blend into the
So it's
law.
really just two people that you have to, like,
right,
wrangle in.
right.
And granted, if they are who they say they are, descendants of Salazar Slytherin, you assume they've inherited some magical ability over the years to be able to handle themselves, but still.
Yeah, I think that they're just very unhinged, and especially Morphin, like, that is like serial killer. If you've seen the first season of True Detective on HBO, there's a character that very much reminds me of Morphin. So
See, you go that route, which is probably the more accurate route. When I think and read Morphin, I think of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, which is just stupid and has nothing to do at all with any of this, but that's what I get.
It's that 90s kid coming out.
Yeah, that's fair. But I do have a question on Morphin, too, actually, of he's carrying a wand in one hand and a knife in the other. With all this pure blood love that they have, and with Mr. Gaunt just berating Merope about the audacity of her bending over to pick up a pan, why are you using a knife to do anything?
Yeah, that's true.
Like, why do you have to carry a knife as a weapon?
Yeah.
You have your wand as a weapon. Shouldn't that be a thing?
That. Yeah. I think it's just to add to that, like, unhinged layer of Morphin.
It's certainly threatening.
You know? And I'm sure, too, it's meant because Muggles are afraid of those types of weapons. That may be part of it as well.
I mean, it was a bloody knife, too, I think they
Yeah.
describe it as. So It was like, it's particularly... It does create a certain vibe, I will acknowledge. And
you still need knives to make, like, potions and stuff.
that's true. I don't know. I just found it as like, that is just an interesting thing.
Yeah.
If you're that prominent of a wizarding family, and you're the descendants of a proud line from Salazar Slytherin himself, and I get that you're maybe poor, and your wealth has been squandered through the generations, maybe even well before you, which we'll get into all of the context of all of this later. But you're wizards. Like, you don't have to live in a broken down house where you see the rafters through the ceiling or the roof. You can fix that.
Yeah, I think that I mean, there's a lot of layers here. I think that this is kind of the epitome of the downfall of like pride in a way, that they're too prideful to even deviate from their history and how they've been living for the last years. If they are poor, they still see themselves as these prominent people, and they don't really care what other people think because they know who they are.
I was like, when I remember fully my reaction when reading this the first time, I was like, oh, they're coming up on this derelict house that looks like completely trashed. I'm thinking, oh, well, this is a spell to make it look like this. So there won't be any intruders. There won't be any, trespassers, because who wants to trespass on a broken down house? There's nothing to take from there. There's nothing to whatever. It's just a really terrible plot of land. And once you get close and break through the enchantment, it'll look like a mansion or like some actual, like, fully refurbished house. No.
Nope.
It's just a derelict house. They just live in squalor, essentially, which is unfortunate and sad, especially for, Merope comes out of this memory looking like the one that you really feel sorry for, because she can't win. Like, there's nothing she can do here.
The other thing I would say too is, like, from what it seems like, with them being, full pure blood supporters, there's probably been a lot of incest happening. So, unfortunately too, with that, there's a lot of mental health issues that come out of that. So I would guarantee that plays a lot too into their daily living and how they function, and if they are able to function, how well are they functioning? I
definitely think that's the vibe that that JK is trying to impart upon us, is that the perceived inbreeding of these purebloods has created some genetic and mental deficits that cause some of the appearance that she seems so specific to describe to us. And yes, you can infer that the mental instability and emotional instability is also derived from some, maybe not the wisest choices in how to create a family line. Dumbledore elaborates a little bit more on that. He starts off by saying, 15 minutes after that interaction between Ogden and Morphin and Mr. Gaunt, Ogden arrived on the premises with reinforcements from the Ministry, and after a little bit of a scuffle, Morphin ends up being captured and sentenced to 3 years in Azkaban, not just for this incident, but for repeated Muggle attacks, and as Ogden noted, doesn't seem very remorseful about it. Seems pretty content with his actions. So 3 years in Azkaban for that. Marvolo, Mr. Gaunt, gets 6 months for injuring Ministry of Magic employees in said scuffle, which he must have done some damage to multiple if he got 6 months for essentially resisting arrest.
Right.
So there's that. Harry, good on Harry, who goes, wait a minute, Marvolo? I recognize that name.
Yep.
And Dumbledore's like, good on you. Yes, you do.
Yes.
We are talking about Voldy's grandfather. And then he continues to make realizations through this. Dumbledore goes on, as we've just talked about with the potential family line issues, that the Gaunts are an ancient family known for instability and violence due to marrying their own cousins.
Yep.
So that's kind of the context that Albus throws around some of their interesting nature. Take that for what you want. But Harry continues to make realizations. Merope would then be Voldy's mother. If Marvolo is the grandfather, that makes Merope the mother. Tom Riddle, the Muggle in the scene that we saw, is the father. And Merope, stunningly not a squib.
Yeah.
which gets into a whole other line of thinking. She's not a squib. With her brother and father in Azkaban, she was able to flex her talents when left alone. And Dumbledore assumes she used a love potion to ensnare Tom Riddle into a forced relationship and forced parentage. And
Gee, love potions. Yeah, I think they're dangerous.
they can be very dangerous. We don't know what type of love potion she used, if she used the Amortentia from the last chapter or just whatever she could get her hands on to, because again, not exactly the richest family. So I don't know what she could have gotten her hands on. But she apparently used this for quite a while because he was ensnared for obviously long enough to have a kid.
Yeah.
Once Marvolo got out, after 6 months, Merope was gone, left a note, and he was foretold to never have mentioned her name or existence from then on.
Yeah.
Which tracks for him. We learned that Azkaban greatly weakened Marvolo, and he did not survive to see Morphin freed. Albus kind of throws some shade on Marvolo because he's like, was it Azkaban really weakening him, or was it the fact that he never learned to feed himself after Merope left? Like, he throws a little bit of shade on Marvolo,
Right.
which I feel like is a little bit petty on Dumbledore's part, but that's okay.
I don't know, though. Marvolo doesn't seem like the nice person around.
Oh, I'm not saying he doesn't deserve some shade.
Yeah.
But yeah, we do learn that Albus assumes Tom Riddle ends up coming back to his family in Little Hangleton and is like, I've been hoodwinked, I've been tricked, I've been whatever. Saying everything but the word, like, enchanted.
Right.
Like, he was careful about his word usage, but Albus assumes Merope stopped giving him the love potion because she felt real emotions for him, and she hoped that after so long of being on the love potion, maybe something in him was like, oh, I love her too.
I really do love her.
Yeah. Spoiler alert, no. Because the second that he was off of it, he was like, what is going on? I am out.
Yeah.
So the thing that I was thinking of in this scenario was, for those of us who have seen the Fantastic Beasts movies, brief spoilers for the Fantastic Beasts movies, but you get Queenie and you get Jacob. And you see it, I can't remember which one it was the second or the third one?
The second one.
Where Queenie puts Jacob under a love potion, and Newt realizes it very quickly because Jacob's acting a little weird.
Yeah.
And when he comes off of the love potion, he's like, wait, why did you even need I actually love you.
Right.
Like, why did you even need to put me on this?
Exactly.
Like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
And there you kind of see the intrusive nature of love potions, and in Queenie's case, I don't know that it was particularly sinister, but it can be sinister.
Oh yeah.
And this is an example of you essentially forced an individual to have a kid with you.
Right, you're taking away somebody's free will.
Yeah. Because Harry even brings up, like, oh, did she use the Imperius Curse? And Albus was like, no, I think she wanted to use a more quote-unquote romantic take on it.
Right.
Which you can romanticize, like, oh, love potion, and we'll be in love together. Not like I am forcing you, but you are.
Right.
You are. But Imperius Curse is, like, it's a worse vibe, I guess.
Yeah.
This is it's a worse reputation, let's say that. But it's essentially the same thing. You're taking away someone's free will.
Mm-hmm.
So Albus kind of assumes all of that. To wrap up the chapter, is essentially Harry can tell Ron and Hermione. However, they must not tell anyone. They keep this close and tight. Dumbledore doesn't want to get out that he knows so much.
Yeah.
He wants to keep that information close to the vest, which in this case, I think he's right.
Oh, 100%.
I think you should keep this close to the vest.
Yes.
You want the fact that you know a lot to not get out.
Yeah.
But Harry also notices that the ring Albus was wearing at Slughorn's is the very same ring from the memory. And Albus, I feel like Albus is just like, is this the most observant this kid has ever been? He figured out Marvolo. He figured out Merope's the mother. He figured out that this ring is the same. Like, he's getting better. Like, he's he's picking up a lot of stuff. This is good. Albus says he acquired it very recently. And then Harry wonders if the ring is related to the hand injury. And Dumbledore once again says, you know what? It's getting late. You should probably get to bed. We'll talk about it another time.
Yeah.
Another dismissal from Dumbledore.
Right.
So yeah, there's a lot from this chapter, especially with the Gaunt family. We'll talk a little bit more about it in the spoilers, yes. But Molly, what are your kind of summations of this chapter? What you got? Why is this your favorite chapter?
Well, I mean, I just love the look into, which is weird. I really love the look into Voldemort and his past and where he came from, and it kind of starts putting those puzzle pieces together as to why Voldy is the way that he is.
Why he's a murderous psychopath?
Right.
He's related to Morphin and Marvolo Gaunt?
Exactly. And just the bitterness that will develop. I love just the background of it. Like why this is, like why someone ticks the way that they tick. And I think like a lot of people, I find like true crime stuff really interesting. And this is almost like a true crime snippet in a wizarding world. So,
do you think this makes Voldy a more sympathetic character?
Yeah, I definitely think it adds a little bit of layers into it because you can feel empathy for his mom and what she went through, and you can kind of just see the background of like, okay, like he has some unhinged tendencies that maybe aren't always in his control.
Yeah,
so.
it like. We always talk about how you're an individual, so you should get credit and blame for your individual traits and talents and actions and all of that kind of thing. But I think here is a glimpse at, well, maybe sometimes some parts of you are out of your control, and you are who your parents are on some level. And I think everybody comes to a point when you're a teenager and you're feisty, you're independent. Your rebellious years, if you will, where you're like, I hate my parents, I hate this, I hate that, blah, 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 blah. And then when you're older, you're like, I actually see my mom in me this way. Right. I actually see my dad in me this way. Right. Why am I responding to this just the way my dad did? Or why am I looking at it the same way my mom did? Or whatever. Yeah, it's a little interesting to kind of get this look at Voldy's family line. Do you think Salazar Slytherin, with his like pure blood tendencies, thought that this is where we would end up?
Most likely not.
Can you imagine if you can go back and talk to Salazar Slytherin and be like, your descendant is going to be Morphin and Marvolo Gaunt?
What do you think?
Do you want to reevaluate your position on like? Well, I think he was assuming back when he was at his prime, there were generally more pure blood wizards. Mm-hmm. And through the generations, they marry muggles, they marry other people, and now you get the half-blood descendancies all over the place, or quote-unquote blood traders, which side you're on.
Right.
So the idea that true pure blood wizards exist is literally thinning out through the generations. Mm-hmm. And I mean, even now, in our Harry Potter's year, I mean, you get the Malfoys and the Black family, which doesn't exist now except for Bellatrix, I suppose. But I mean, those lines are becoming very, very thin.
Very thin.
And they're all related to each other because Bellatrix Lestrange is Narcissa Malfoy's sister, and you're getting like all this convoluted family lines. Yeah. So I don't think Salazar Slytherin had intended for the purebloods to be such a convoluted mess.
No.
He wanted separation between muggles and wizards. That was his whole thing. So I don't think he ever expected Morphin
to be the result of his dream.
Yeah, I don't think he would particularly approve of that. I don't think he'd approve of Morphin.
Yeah.
And he'd be like, You know what? Give me that locket and ring back. I don't think you need to be
Yeah.
carrying on our legacy.
This lineage.
I don't think he'd be particularly thrilled.
Yeah.
And honestly, I don't know how like people like Lucius Malfoy. I don't know how much they know about Voldy's past,
Right.
but I don't know they'd be particularly thrilled about Morphin.
Well, that whole family setup, like the whole them living in squalor and
Yeah,
dirty, and it doesn't seem like a very
but we're pureblood.
right. That doesn't seem like a very Lucius thing.
That's what I'm saying.
I don't think he's making image boards on that one.
No,
No.
he's not making a collage of
No.
family memories.
No.
No.
He might. Who knows?
Dark Lord, I've made a collage of your family history. I think he would be struck dead right there.
Right. This is my vision board.
This is how you came to be.
Yeah.
No.
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 I just think it's overall fascinating to see the beginning of Voldy's past and how he became, and just the nature versus nurture nature versus nurture tendencies that people have and how people become the way that they do.
I think Voldy being raised away from Morphin and Marvolo, I think him being raised away from those two is probably the best thing that could have ever happened to Voldy.
I would say so.
Because at least I'm not saying Morphin's not a bright guy.
Mm-hmm.
Voldy's brighter.
Yeah.
Voldy's a little bit more sharper than Morphin. And I don't think being raised in that environment, in that house, would have done anything for Voldy's ambitions.
No.
But
yeah.
We will end it right here for the non-spoiler. And after the break sound, we will pick it right up with a couple of interesting spoiler section comments. So we will be right back. Before we get to our break sound, I'd like to acknowledge our friend Andy, who helps us produce our intros and our break sounds. If you want to hear more of Andy's work and like Formula One racing, check out the Outlap F1 podcast. It's your one-stop shop for Formula One news, insights, race previews, and reviews. You can find them wherever you listen to podcasts, and they even have a YouTube page. So check out Andy, Cody, John, James, and Deanna, and join them on the Outlap.
Where is he? Where's my 1-1?
All right, so we're back with the spoiler section of Chapter 10, The House of Gaunt. And we talked a lot about family lines in the non-spoiler. Well, now we get to the spoiler version of those family lines. Because, interestingly enough, technically, Harry Potter and Voldy are related. I know what you're saying. What? Yeah, so they note that there was the ring with the Peveril coat of arms.
Yep.
The Peveril coat of arms are the symbol of the Deathly Hallows, right? So the Peverils, I will turn it over to Mollie for the whole history of the Peverils, but obviously there's three brothers.
Yeah.
The three brothers.
So there's the three brothers. They were Antioch, Camdus, and Ignotus. So Antioch, we all know, died after a duel because somebody coveted the
Elder Wand. Mm-hmm.
Camdus had the Resurrection Stone. So Camdus is the one who is most likely related to the Marvolos, or to the Gaunts.
Mm-hmm.
Camdus, most likely, because he didn't die right away like Antioch, he most likely sired children, and his beloved that he brought back had died an untimely death, which could have been during childbirth to the children he sired. And then Ignotus was obviously the one with the cloak. That ended up going on to the Potters. What is interesting about that is that it had started as the fathers would pass down the cloak to their sons and so forth. Eventually the male lineage died where one of the daughters got it, And then she ended up marrying a Potter and then continued the passing down of the cloak from father to son. Hence, we have Harry Potter with the cloak. What I also find really interesting about that whole thing is if Candace's wife, beloved, had died during childbirth, it's really interesting and maybe why Voldy has a tie to that ring in general, that Merope, Voldy's mother, also died during childbirth. The history on that.
Yeah, we're not saying they're like brothers.
No.
They are very, very distant cousins.
Relative cousins.
Like, literally at the very beginnings of these two lineages. Cousins, and then just like spiraled as far as you could probably get away from each other.
Exactly.
But there are some genetic markers that do technically say they're technically related just very, very distantly.
Right.
But yeah, you can trace them both back to the Peveril brothers. Mm-hmm. And I like some of the similarities that you were drawing with like the childbirth thing with Merope and Cadmus and how those kind of connected. It's interesting that the Ignotus line goes and then switches over at some point and then comes down.
Right.
That's kind of interesting how it ends up really in the Potter's possession. But it's just, I guess, more interesting how Potter and Voldy are still tied together in some way.
Right.
I mean, even though they're so... I mean, really, those genetic markers are slim at this point in the history, but yet they're still so intimately tied with Hallows.
Right. And the interesting thing, too, is it even ties back into the prophecy. Marked him as his equal.
Yeah.
At one point in their lineage, they were brother, like, you know, somebody was they were brothers through the line. Mm-hmm. Not saying that Voldy and Harry are brothers.
Right. But at some point in their line, the three brothers were of equal magical ability and talent.
Right. And then they all took totally different paths.
Right.
So
it's kind of an interesting thing to kind of weave that all the way back. And it's interesting that even now, in this memory, Marvolo is flaunting the Peveril coat of arms. Do you think Slytherin, because he would have been in this line, do you think Slytherin at some point recognized at all what the Resurrection Stone was?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Because, I mean, you're talking about a great wizard.
Right.
Like, you can disagree with his points of view and his political stances all you want.
Yeah.
But no one can deny he's a great wizard who's very intelligent, very highly skilled.
Yeah.
Like, you'd think he'd have to realize what that was, right?
Have an inkling of,
Or was it so far down already at that point that history had been lost? But then they do say the Peveril coat of arms. So if you know that history at all, you could tie it to the Resurrection Stone. Right. So it's murky on like what that history would be. If you knew it's a Peveril thing,
right,
and you know the history.
I mean, did Salazar even know that that's like, was that even in his conscious of knowing that it existed?
It also got turned into a fairy tale. Yeah. So most people in Harry's era think that the Peverils didn't even actually exist. They're a fairy tale.
Exactly.
So at what point did that happen?
Yeah.
So there's that side of things. The other thing, obviously, we're talking about Hallows. We can switch over and talk about Horcruxes, because obviously the ring and the locket are featured in this chapter. So I'm just throwing it out there that this memory is a memory that Dumbledore goes back to fairly often.
Oh, I'm sure.
Considering two of them are featured in the same memory.
Exactly.
Also, could you imagine being Bob Ogden and just being visited by Albus Dumbledore? Be like, hey, can I have a memory real quick?
Hey, you know anything about these people? Could I have that memory? Thanks.
Can I have a memory of you just going to this weird house and arresting these weird people?
Yeah.
Why do you want that? Don't worry about it.
Just, for funsies.
Yeah, don't worry about the details. It's fine.
Research. That's all.
It's just a weird request.
Right?
Who knew that Bob Ogden would be like an essential linchpin in the whole way to take down a dark wizard that he didn't even knew existed, probably.
Right.
Like, well, he probably did. I would assume, can't remember when he probably died, but.
Right. I just feel like I have to do a little bit more justification.
Go for it.
Because I feel like people are like, really, Molly? Like, this, your favorite chapter? I just love the whole feel of it. It's like, I know it's in like the English countryside somewhere, but in my brain, I just picture this as like the old like bayou in Louisiana and those true crime documentaries. So yeah, I like the vibes.
I can see a very like backwoods bayou in Louisiana, or like an Appalachian, like an Appalachia backwoods area.
Yeah, that's just I don't know, like totally non-related to it actually being the English countryside. My brain just jumps immediately to like, you know, if you've read Where the Crawdads Sing, you know, with the marshes and stuff like that. So just these like feral people living it out on their own. So it's just an interesting.
I can't imagine what about Morphin gave you that feral vibe.
Nothing really.
I know, right?
Yeah. Just overall, I like the vibe, even though it's really dark.
It is dark, but I think there is some interesting parts, like we've talked about for probably the majority of this episode, is just the lineage of Voldy, and knowing like where Voldy comes from is super interesting, and obviously you can nitpick it to an extreme degree. Yeah. So I think that is really interesting, and I hesitate to say that Dumbledore's added context at the end really makes it, you know, the interesting chapter, because you get to like. Right. You're probably when you first read this, you're probably very much like Harry about like, what in the world did we just witness?
Right, exactly.
And then Dumbledore just fills it all in, and you're like, oh, well, this is interesting.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know how many of you guys as listeners, after Dumbledore's context, went back and reread the memory with that new context. And did it change your opinion of the memory? I don't know. We've read it a couple of times, so now we probably have a distorted view of the memory anyway, because we have all the context.
Probably.
But I'm wondering, on like first reads, you know, it's like you're probably right there with Harry, being like, "What is going on? Like, what is this, and why is this important?"
Who are these people?
It's an interesting chapter with an interesting vibe that we have not seen in Harry Potter before.
By the way, I have nothing against people from Louisiana or from the Bayou. My mother's from Louisiana, so I just want to throw that out there as well.
Just some context.
Yes, I'm not trying to make fun of people here.
I have also been to Louisiana. I love Louisiana. Yeah. Louisiana is a fine state. So if you're listening from Louisiana, welcome to Hogwarts, a podcast.
Enjoy the amazing food you have out there.
Oh, such good food.
Right?
Such good food. I'm due for another trip to New Orleans. But anyway, if you don't have anything else, I think we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, good.
Cool. So let us know your comments on the memory. What did you think of Marvolo and Morphin and their dynamic, as well as Merope and her situation in the whole love potion of it all, the whole her discovering magic after her abusers were away. I think that's something you can really find throughout the series, is when you're under stress, you can discover new amazing things about yourself when you're away from that awful environment. And I think you've seen it in Neville a couple of times, and now you've seen it with Merope in a completely different context. So let us know what you think on the whole Gaunt family dynamic. And leave those comments on Spotify, where you can also participate in the poll that I will also attach to this episode, and on Twitter and Instagram, where you can find us at Hogwarts a Pod. Share the podcast. We really appreciate it. We also have a support the podcast link wherever you're listening to this, so you can support us financially, because it's a lot of time and effort that goes into making these, so we really appreciate that help as well. Other than that, we will end it here, and we will return next week for Chapter 11. So we'll see you then. Thanks for listening. Thank you for listening to Hogwarts, a podcast. If you like what you've heard, please click the subscribe button on your preferred podcasting app and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Hogwarts a Pod.